Welcome to another Tuesday Live podcast with your host, Joe and Jen. Today, we are going to break some real estate myths, and I am super pumped about this one. This is one of my favorite podcasts by far. We're going to talk about you don't need credit to buy rentals. And you're like, wait a second,
They
Joe.
lied to you. They lied that you need to go to the banks. They lied that you need great credit. They lied. They're wrong. Whatever you want to call it. And we're here to demystify or
Yeah.
debunkify the myth that is that you have to do everything the traditional way. Even though you can, you don't have to. So we're going to dive into how we can do that.
Yeah, and it's super exciting too, because a lot of times we don't realize that we don't need it. And I didn't realize this strategy for a super long time. And once I really kind of mastered this art, I was like, oh my gosh. So we're going to dive into it today. So if you're listening and you've got great credit, good for you, great job. You don't need it to buy all of the real estate that you want.
And you can have it.
If you've got bad credit, guess what? You can still buy real estate today too. And that's what we're going to dive into. So why credit isn't necessary for creative finance. And this is why I love this strategy. When I first got started into real estate investing, when we were buying our first bunch of rentals, this was right when the market was taking a dip, guys. 2008, 9, 10. We all heard about the big crash in 08. Well, it kind of kept trickling down slowly for a few years, actually. So in that time, we were buying some properties that we were turning into rentals, but we were going to a bank. We first had to find the deal, right? And that was really hard. But there were some out there we did. And then we were remodeling them. We were going to the bank, pulling all of our cash back out and waiting for that next deal. And that's what we were really worried about, was like, how can I even find these? Where were the ones that made sense? But it was slowly and surely. And I think back, those were we did some really great deals back then. But then when I was being told by the bank, refinancing out of one of our next properties, that Joe, Jen, at 10 mortgages, we cut you off. So that's where I was like, oh my gosh, we need to figure out something else. And that's when we stumbled
I was like, what are we going to do then? It's 10's not going to get us where we wanted to be.
No, we wanted to have more than 10 rentals. Which, hey, if you're listening and you want one, that's okay. If you want 10, that's cool too. If you want more, well, guess what? We need to get creative. And that's when I really learned this was even a thing. So I was used to buying junkers that we were fixing up and making beautiful and then refinancing them. But I didn't know that I could buy turnkey houses without bank approval, without any of this, until we learned what creative finance was. So what is creative finance? It is a big umbrella term. We talk about it all the time, but it is how to buy properties without using banks. And this could be a single family home. This could be multifamily. I know people who've done it on businesses. It could be done on multiple things. So it's not just buying rentals this way. Maybe you are looking for your own house. I know tons of people who bought their own house using these strategies too. So why is seller financing so important? Well, the one big thing that I loved was we're trying to beat the banks. I'm trying to get better terms than I can from going to a traditional bank today. And as you're listening to this recording, today is what day is today? It is the 12th of November 2024. And rates right now are about 7%. Could be even
really?
8%. Yeah, they're up there a little bit.
I thought they were going down.
Well, they did trickle down for a little bit, but now they're going back up. And the thing is, this is what I've noticed. There's a lot of times where I could find a deal, but at 8% or 7%, they just don't cash flow. So that's where, once again, I realized that we could stumble into some deals. So why creative finance? Well, if I'm buying a property with seller financing, free and clear property, and I'm able to buy that, and instead of having to go get a loan, we could just pay the seller directly, like we did with Seller Steve and so many others.
Yeah.
Love that. No credit checks, did we?
No.
No W-2s.
No.
Easy peasy.
Like, you can legit go buy a car and then go buy a house this way, right? Because they always say, don't go do a big purchase if you're going to qualify with a loan at the banks. Isn't that like the number one thing that like crushes?
Yeah. All the time when I worked at the dealership, somebody's looking to buy a house, and when you're looking to buy a house, they say don't make any major purchases, and then somebody goes out and buys a car, and then they realize they can't get their mortgage, right? So like weird stuff would happen. And once we realize that we don't have to go that way, game over, right? Then the second strategy we learned was how to buy what's called a wraparound mortgage. So what does that mean, Joe? What does that mean, Jen? That means that I can buy the house and just pay the seller's mortgage directly. I'm not assuming it. I don't have to qualify. I don't even need bank approval. I'm going to buy the house. I'm going to close on it. I'm going to take title to it. And I'm going to pay the seller's mortgage directly. No W-2s, no 2 years of tax returns, no credit check, nothing. And I was like, wait a minute, like, is this even really a thing? And it is, guys. And this is how we have been able to buy so many homes. And even though rates right now are really high, we've got a property under contract we're working on right now with a seller who's got a 2.875 interest rate. So under 2.9%. Now, we're going to get into obviously why sellers would want to do this, right? So we're going to talk about like, why is this the thing? And we're going to dive into why sellers would want it, how seller financing works, and why do these sellers even agree to it too. So I'm going to go over Steve, right? And this is one of my favorite ones. It was the very first deal that we did this way. And I figured a way to make it super simple. Steve inherited his grandfather's house. He lived an hour away. He was renting it to a coworker, and that coworker was calling him for repairs, and he didn't want to drive all the way there. So he actually wanted to sell it. And when he reached out, this house did not need work. It was turnkey. It was ready to go. And he's like, Joe, I'm not going to go for some lowball offer. I really want my price, which was more than enough of a good deal. When I explained to him that I could pay that price if he's open to me paying it in payments every month, he was like, that's fine, as long as I could get my number. And if you remember when we did the walkthrough, like, he had sentimental value with the house. He had shown us where the Thanksgiving dinners were and all of those things too. So he had some attachment to the house. So giving him some half off low offer wouldn't have worked, especially it wasn't a junker. So that's when we realized that. And then we had the next one we bought this way, but this one had a mortgage. Woman bought a house. She lived there by herself, meets a guy, gets married, moves in with him in his house because he already owned one. They've started kids. They turned this other house into a rental. And they realized that they did not want to be a landlord. They were accidental landlords. We still have that house right on Titus Avenue in Irondequoit. And when she reached out, she was like, I just want to get this thing sold. Tenants just moved out in the middle of the night. We spent some time fixing it back up, and I don't want to have people trash it again. I'd love to have it sold. So when I explained to her, we'll buy it with $100 down. I'm going to close on it. I'll pay your price, but I'm just going to take over your existing mortgage. I'm going to pay that lender directly. What bank is that? Do you even know?
Do you even know?
No, I don't know.
Yeah. Bank is PennyMac.
Okay, so we pay PennyMac directly for that loan. I didn't have to get approval through PennyMac or any of those things. We just did the thing. So for her, once again, it was about ease. So why do so many sellers, why would they do this?
Well, like you said, you hit the easy button, and it just depends on their situation. And, you know, though, again, the way she found us was just crazy because we did not run ads. We simply had a Facebook business page for our rent to own business. So we always talk about free marketing. And so just making sure that you're well established on a professional business page, totally free on Facebook. And she saw that we sold houses rent to own. So she reached out and said, well, do you buy, you know, a different kind of way? 'Cause I don't want to deal with all the rigmarole that is listing with a realtor and getting it market ready. I just want to be done with this house. I want to move in with my husband and live my happy life. That's what she was able to do.
Bam. And we bought that deal, made it a cute house.
And that worked in 2018.
Yep.
And again, just last week in 2020 or 2024, where the sellers were just in a rush to move to Texas and they left their Spectrum cable box. You know, we tell them we buy as is. And so, you know, the beautiful thing to get creative is like you allow the sellers to just sigh that big relief of I don't have to remember every little detail that can consume your world when you are moving, especially from Florida to Texas, or even if it's across town. You know, a move is a move and it's a lot to deal with. So just remember that as you're offering these terms.
Yeah. And I think that's the big key. So sellers want to do this. It doesn't work for every one of them, obviously, but they want to because most of the time it's speed and convenience. Selling as is, you know, they had a bunch of stuff. If you remember, Derek, the seller, he's already in Texas and his wife is still here in Florida, like packing up.
Yeah. And as a new investor, you might scratch your head and say, well, why would you want to now deal with all of this stuff? I had somebody ask me that. You know, they were honestly just kind of like, why would you want to put that burden on you? Because our job is to make it as easy as possible on the seller. And kind of explain like all of the benefits when we buy this way. We just got a brand new house built 2 years ago. We spent out of pocket way less than 20% down.
Yeah, it was $12,000 down
Yeah.
plus like 9,000 in closing costs. And so for 21,000 out of pocket, we own a 2-year-old home in Florida that has a 4% interest rate on it and solar panels.
And when we first got started, we would not maybe have done a deal with that much. But now, as we've grown, we understand the market in Florida. I mean, coming from upstate, prices were a little different up there. And we were able to do $100 down. Even down here, you can still do that. But like, as you see Jen and Joe today, we share our real life experiences. But I want you to really think bigger, because in this situation, a couple $100 to clean out their house relieves them of so much stress. And so at the end of the day, as an investor, you kind of budget that into your acquisitions or your entry
Cost of
fee.
that, cost of getting into it is I might have to spend a few bucks cleaning the house out.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm going to be having to put a new roof on it or new windows on it or a new driveway or any of these things or a new bathroom, because it's 2 years old, guys. So
yeah, we're not talking about we paid $40,000 cash and now we got to fix all the things,
No.
right? Like,
no,
it's little tiny things. And it's also, we always liken it to like the white glove treatment too, like how you treat your sellers and how can you really help somebody else out? Because if you find their motivation, which is question number 2 on our 10 magic questions to ask sellers, why are they selling? And to be able to really help them with that problem they're trying to solve and getting them out there as soon as possible. And guys, it ranges. Some of our sellers have really serious stuff going on. Like maybe their husband has cancer and you really are possibly the one that's going to be able to help work with them in this time of need and just kind of be there and work around all of that that's happening. Like there's really, like, people need our help. And I feel like whether it's just a standard move across country or there's a health concern or a family member, whatever it may be, but be a human, find out some questions there. And like the last thing you need to worry about is getting your credit checked at the bank, because there are bigger problems to solve.
Yeah. Now, if you're listening, you got to think about, have you ever sold a house before? Your house that you're living in. And if you have, you understand what it's like. If you haven't, talk to somebody who has. Because when we were living in upstate New York and we vacationed in Florida, we decided we loved it here so much, we're going to go sell our house back in New York. Now, we lived in a beautiful house in a beautiful neighborhood, but when you have 2 little ones and a dog, like to get your house market ready, like you're going to have to do some stuff.
There's a million projects that, in his free time, I'm sure he was going to get to someday, but we ended up building our businesses.
Well, not only that too, like if you think about it, we come back from Florida and our air conditioning system, central air system died. So it's like you got to spend some money getting your house ready. And sometimes people don't have that time. They don't have the money. Or sometimes they just don't have like the capacity to even handle something like that. So here's a major tip. If you're listening, you want to make sure that your sellers hit the easy button doing business with you. This is a crucial thing. And we want to make sure that we explain that value in the very beginning, that you don't have to lift a finger. We're going to do all of the things. We'll even pay all of the closing costs, both sides, our side and your side. And that will save you some money there too. And if you don't have to worry about the clean out, my gosh, it just goes, right? So I think that's the big thing too. And then, so I want to dive into, because, I'm always so positive. I always talk about what are the pros of seller finance, but what are the bad things about seller financing, right? What are the cons, right? So pros and cons, I look at both sides. So obviously pros, I like buying real estate without having to go to the bank. I like be able to get much better interest rates, because if we buy this way, rates are always low, right? I'm still getting 2%, 3%, 4% rates now when banks are 7%, 8% currently. How are we getting rates for half off? This is the way. But what about the other side of it, right? So what are the tough things? Well, I'll be quite honest with you. One of the bigger challenges are finding the deals, right? This doesn't work for everybody. So I used to think, well, just talk to anybody. And of course, like, maybe we could convince them. It doesn't convince, right? You're coming from a place of understanding what tools are available and offering them in the right situations. So what we've figured out is we need to really make sure that we're working with motivated sellers. And so when you spend your time with somebody, sometimes their best bet is just to list it on the market with an agent. And I always ask them, well, how come you haven't considered putting it on the market with an agent? And there's many times where I'm having conversation with the seller, or our team is now, and we're reading the conversation. And I've got one right now. I'll give you the example. She owes $200,000 on her home. Her husband's got some stuff going on. She doesn't want a deal. They just want this place sold quickly. They need to downsize. The steps are too much for them. She's like, I need to walk away with $200,000 in my pocket so we could buy our next house. She wants $450 for it. She owes $200. So she understands there's going to be fees and commissions if she lists it on the market, where in that situation, it's turnkey. It needs nothing. So offering her half off or it being a fixer-upper doesn't work. In that situation, I said, your best bet is to go list it with an agent because they needed equity right away. So in some of these situations, it does not work. And so that's a challenge, guys. So you got to get really good at making those conversations with sellers. It's a numbers game, just like anything else. It doesn't matter if you're buying or selling. It's a numbers game. So the faster you can get some leads in front of you, and then really focus on the motivated sellers who actually have some situations going on, that's where you're going to start making some of the deals. So if you're working with people who aren't motivated, or sometimes they need that equity out of that deal to go buy their next house, well, then that's where it doesn't work, right? So it doesn't work for everybody. You got to make a lot of offers, right? And the way we do that is we actually have the seller make us the offer. Some of the challenges are, especially if you're just starting out, is like, what do these conversations even sound like? How do I find the people? And then when I do, what conversations? So we have made that part really easy for you guys. And if you don't already have it, go to our website, creativefinanceplaybook.com, and go download our script for free. It's the same one that we use. It's our team uses. And it really, really works well because we ask a series of questions. We call it a script. It's just a series of questions. But the way we do it, the seller will actually make us the offer. So now I'm just kind of reviewing offers, and either I'm accepting that offer or sometimes I'm counter offering. Maybe they want too much money down and I have to get that lower to make the deal work, right? So it's a numbers game. It's a numbers game. It's a numbers game. I can't stress it enough. So if you're just starting off and you say, Joe, I've talked to 2 sellers and guess what? They both said no. Well, guess what? That's a good start. Okay. You got to keep going. So if you think it's going to work for everybody, you just got to be very mindful, as you might have to talk to 50 people and hear no. You might have to talk to 100 people to get yes. Right.
And you might have to talk to them multiple times too. I feel like that's something that, people, oh, well, I talked to the one person and they said no, or they wanted the $200,000 down. And then they just like put, that lead slips off their desk and they move on with life. And the thing is, you need to follow up. That time and circumstance happens. Some ways they find ways to get other money and they're able to move on to a different house. And now they still have this house. And so here you can come in with your superhero cape and help out.
Yeah. And I think about the one we did not too long ago in New York. It's a cute house on a couple acres in New York, turnkey. The folks just bought it a year before we did. So they bought it. They lived there for a little over a year, and they realized they don't want to live in upstate New York anymore, and they wanted to move to Florida. I understand. We get it. Okay. We'd understand completely. But what happened was they were moving regardless. They didn't, if you remember, they didn't have an agent.
No.
They were just like, hey, we found a house. We're moving. We can't afford 2 payments. So, well, I guess we're going to have to figure it out somehow, but we want this thing up here gone. So when they reached out to us, we had the conversation that we can buy it. We'll buy it, but the mortgage is going to stay in place because the payment was pretty low. And once we explained them that, we have an attorney who crosses all the T's and dot the I's, it's totally legal how to do it this way. And so we'll take ownership. So you're just free to go. They absolutely loved that solution, but it took a few phone calls to kind of get them to thoroughly explain it to them, get them to wrap their heads around it. And then after that, they're like, good, how soon can you guys close?
I think they literally started packing that night.
Yeah. Right. And that's what happened because they were ready to go. So I think, were they in Florida by the time we already signed the paperwork?
Oh, yeah. They were down here for a little while.
Yeah. So
good old New York closing.
Those New York closings do take a little bit extra time.
Yeah. But people need some time for you to understand it. And we weren't sitting there going into detail about a wraparound mortgage or subject to or any of this crazy jargon. We just explained very simply what was happening. We made sure all the paperwork was properly laid out. The attorneys had everything to go, and just keep it simple. Don't overly complicate it.
Yeah. And I think that's the key to it. I used to say, oh, we'll buy it subject to or with a wraparound mortgage. And then I would confuse people. So guys, if you're listening to this, girls listening, don't make it complicated. simplify it. Simple, keep it simple and thorough so they
Mhm.
fully understand what they're getting into. And if it's a good fit for them, the next step is doing the paperwork, right?
Mhm.
Which to me it was a struggle in the beginning, but we've mastered that and got real good at that. So, when we talk about how this works, why this works, I think of real life situations. So, why would somebody do this? We come into all different types of situations. I've had people who are relocated for their job. I've had someone recently where he's divorced and he's moving back up north. He put the house on the market, turnkey. He tried, because I asked him, why didn't you list it with an agent? He's like, I did. It didn't work.
Mm.
It wasn't selling. And I got to go. And I got to give my wife some money, ex-wife. So she needs some money from the divorce. So like, I need to go. Turnkey house. He was reaching out to cash buyers. He's like, everybody just keeps lowballing me. And this isn't some junker. This thing is gorgeous, on the water. It doesn't need anything. But then come to find out, he's got a 2.875 interest rate. So there's some value in that deal, right? Just there alone. Because
Mhm.
guys, if you can find rates at 2.8 right now, just try to buy some of those, right? So that's really the key. So I think of the divorce, I think of the inherited properties, the job transfers, right? All of these things were what led us to deals. I'll tell you what, if you're buying deals in upstate New York, a lot of those people want to move out of New York, probably because of the gray skies and the weather. They say taxes, but taxes around down here are not about the same. So there's not that big of a tax relief in Florida. However, the weather is great. So we did a lot of business with people who are moving out of state
Mhm.
back up there. Down in Florida, we have a lot of folks who this is a second home, right? They live back up north, and this is a second home to them, and they just want to sell it because of hurricanes or whatever that is. So there's a huge list. I don't need to beat about too bad, but stop trying to figure it out why. Ask them, have
Mhm.
them tell you, and move on with the script. Get all the questions answered.
Yeah. And so if you're thinking, well, gee, it sounds like a lot of work to like go post in these Facebook groups and then start asking these people questions, and then I got to get on a phone call. Okay, then go the alternate route and then try to fill out all the paperwork for the bank and try to get approved for loan. Like to me, that was way more work and it's way harder and just time intensive. Like by the time you can talk to 100 sellers, you can wrap up a couple of deals in one time trying to like refinance out of one property or get a loan on another one. Like
It's absolutely nuts. So I think of once again, we've done both sides. We've gone to the banks, we've gone that route.
Mhm.
And don't get me wrong, it can work, but when you're buying at today's prices, you add in today's interest rates, you put in the taxes and the insurance, and then especially if you've got management involved, what are you making? It's not a whole lot. So it could look glamorous on
Mhm.
paper that you own some
But does it
properties, but
really once you look at numbers on paper?
well,
Maybe
you're like,
like
oh, you
the
own all these
number
houses.
of doors,
Right.
but and then also to scale as quick, like the fact that it took us from what 2008 to 2016, 17 to get 5, and
Mhm.
then from 2017 to 2020 we had 5 more, and then from 2020 to today we've more than doubled. And so it's like you can just scale a lot quicker with learning these methods and getting really great at asking questions and putting a pencil to your paper and just making sure like the numbers work, that the deal makes sense without having to go to the banks.
Yeah. And then if you do rent to own, you'll start making a lot of money too.
And I almost feel like sometimes as humans we like to try to make things harder and not work smarter. And if you can just like if that's the one thing you work on in 2025 coming up here is working smarter, not harder, and stop trying to reinvent the wheels and to really follow the footsteps. Like we didn't invent this.
Mhm.
We truly took the education seriously, followed the exact protocol, and yes, implemented rent to own, which brings in way more money and a lot happier tenants and eventually homeowners. I would never go back to straight up rentals.
Well, on the flip side, I'm going to go a little bit of a step further. We used to do Burr, and man, that really stinks,
Well, I know.
right? We had to buy a fixer upper that you had to get a good deal on. You had to then hire contractors, unless you're crazy enough to do it all yourself.
And from start to finish, like the time frame it would take to actually like put money back into your pocket.
It could be 6 months. It could be even longer, depending
I'd say
on.
way longer than 6
Well,
months.
now what
Follow the
they're doing
project.
is with these new guidelines is they're making it that you have to hold a property for, I believe it's a year before you could refinance out of it.
Wow, there you go.
So they just changed that.
Whereas you can now go direct to seller, get a brand new property or 2-year-old property without banks, without getting your credit checked, and be able to instantly get paid as soon as you find your tenant buyer.
Well, and get a 4% rate, because at 7.5%, that property doesn't cash flow.
Didn't even think of that part.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the problem. That's the problem with that deal. It wouldn't cash flow at 7.5%.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't. And at 4%, that's the profit that we're making on there, is because we have it at that rate. So with the taxes and the insurance and all of the goodies, we can still cash flow on that property. So that's why that turned into a deal. And so this is where I keep on having that mental battle. Is like when your people are like, hey, I'm new and I hear that I should get into doing BRRRR, where I'm buying these fixer uppers and remodeling them. And I'm like, that's absolutely probably the last thing.
The last thing I would tell a new investor is go do a fix and flip in BRRRR or any of that. I feel like it is way more labor and a lot more money and a lot more stress and headaches and a lot more managing of a lot of moving parts. If you've never done a flip and you've never managed contractors,
You got to get
never
permits.
just one person. It's
Yeah.
a lot of different people coming in, the electric, the flooring, the this, the that, and it all adds up. But you can literally, like, between you, an attorney, and a seller,
Buy a house that doesn't need any of that. And that's where I fell in love with no more having to hire contractors to fix up our next rental.
and we love contractors. They do a great job when those houses, there are some houses out there that need it, but we're saying for someone who's looking to get into real estate, you could start with creative financing. Because I know some people out there say, well, creative financing is only for people that, know what they're doing. Now, you learn what you're doing and you hire coaches, mentors, you get the education, you surround
Well, wait a
yourself
minute.
with
Are you
what
supposed to do BRRRR and not know what you're doing?
Apparently there's enough books and enough YouTube videos out there. I'm just saying the word on the street from what I gather.
Let me tell you how many people reach out to me right now and say, hey, Joe, I'm doing a fix and flip and I'm losing my tail on it. I just had a
Hey.
call with a couple 2 weeks ago, and they have a deal. They've bought it. They've renovated the whole thing. They borrowed the money from a hard money lender. Their term is almost up. It's been sitting on the market and there's nobody going through the house to look at it. And so they keep dropping the price. They're like, if I drop the price any lower, we're going to lose 10,000 or 20,000. And I'm like, well, at a break even, you're not making any money and there's nobody buying the house. So it's either you start really cutting the price and move it, or it just sits there longer and longer and it gets more expensive because they borrowed the money.
Well, because too, like you just said about the rates, it's like anybody looking to get a mortgage right now, it's like if you look at the history, or even if you do fix it up a little bit, like the cost of these is just, it doesn't make sense to a lot of people.
Well, and I had a talk with a seller yesterday. It was one of our on our support call,
Which I heard it was fire, by the way. Everybody was
it was so good. We did so many different calls yesterday in the support call, but we had one lady, I was explaining to her, her payment is $1,258 a month. I'm explaining to her the way I could buy the property is with owner financing and just me taking over your old payment, because the property rents for about $1,700 to $1,800. And she's like, well, what happens if you just were to go to the bank and just buy it? And I'm like, well, if I buy it at your price, the payment goes to $2,800 a month. I would lose $1,000 a month if I would just buy it and then turn it into a rental. And this is why her house was sitting on the market, because why would anybody pay almost $3,000 a month to buy her house when there's 5 other rentals in that neighborhood at like $1,900, $2,000?
And was she receptive to that?
She was. That was the thing that was like, oh, now I get it. So when do I get my equity? And I was like, well, I've had some sellers, they're going to give me 20 to 30 years before I get them cashed out. And she's like, oh, I can't wait that long. I'm like, no, I get it. I've had some who want to get cashed out sooner, like 10 or maybe even 15 years. So if I pay that price and I cover all the closing costs and fees and buy it as is, what's the most amount of time you'd give me? And she's like, well, I could probably do like 10 years. And I'm like, well, then now here we go. Right?
Now we're talking.
Because now I can buy that deal. She really wasn't concerned about her equity because she owes like half of what she's selling it for. So she's got a lot of equity. And I said, well, do you have a plan with your equity? She's like, no, we're just going to put it in my account. I was like, well, then if you're going to sell it and it's not selling on the market at your price with an agent, this is a way that we can make a deal work where I could pay a good price for it and still get a really low payment. So it works out well for both of us. And she's like, I like this. So
Do you
no,
mean you just had a normal conversation and you weren't just convincing her
Nope.
or shoving, all the information down? her
no,
throat?
because then she started calling me back. I'm like, hey, listen, I mean, so if we do this, when can we close? Like she called me back and I was like, well, I mean, I could close whenever you want. I know the attorney here takes usually our title company in Florida takes about 2 weeks because she's like, she's not even living in it. The house is empty. Her daughter was living there. Daughter moved out. They're up north in Pennsylvania. They're going to build a log cabin. So she's got this house in Florida. It's just sitting there. It's beautiful. It's on the market. It's not selling. So when I called her,
it's not local.
Cape Coral, of course, where all these nice houses are, but we don't want to live in Cape Coral. So either way. But yeah, so she's in a spot. And when I call her, I'm like, why isn't this beautiful house of yours selling? And she's like, that's a really good question. So that was even the way I started the conversation.
Right.
Didn't come in like I'm salesy or I'm trying to buy something.
I'm a big time investor.
No, not at all. We had a great talk. But when I explained to her once again, the way I could make your price work is with owner financing where I could buy it, pay your price, but still get a really low payment. So it works out well for you and me. Because if I buy it at your price and at today's interest rates, my payment goes way too high and I can't rent it. It's $1,000 more a month than what it rents for. And that's when she had the light bulb aha moment. I could literally hear it on the phone. We were on the Zoom call. Everybody's listening in and they were like, oh my gosh. So if you guys want to know more about this stuff too, we're doing a webinar this Saturday. So if you're watching this live and you guys want to go to the webinar, it's free. It's this Saturday.
It's a live training where you're going to walk them down how we're getting these houses $100 down.
Drop a comment down below and we'll make sure that you get the invite to come. You're not going to want to miss this training. I'm coming with you guys on the Saturday, so you know it's going to be good. But these are the situations that we're able to actually help these people pay a fair price, don't have to worry about giving low ball offers, which makes me feel good too. Now, there's sometimes where it's a junker, fixer-upper.
It needs the work.
And it needs the work. And I'm not giving them a low ball offer. I'm giving them a fair price for what the house is worth in that condition, right? But I will say, when I'm able to now have these intelligent conversations with homeowners that have really nice properties, and I could even make an offer on those too, complete game changer, get these rentals. Maybe it's even your own home. Right. So this stuff really, really works. I see I've got some people popping in saying that they want to get the invite.
I want to say real quick, thank you so much, Nick. You are awesome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks,
and absolutely, we're going to make sure that you get that. And also head over to creativefinanceplaybook.com, hit on the events tab. That webinar, that event is there for you. So you can also sign up, but we'll make sure you get it. And you're so welcome. You know what? This is why we love coming live to you. It's something he started years ago, but we share what we are currently doing, what we've been through, where we're currently going, and the situations that we're still finding sellers in, and those in our community who also bring their deals to Joe, and he calls their sellers for them so they can hear live time exactly how to negotiate, how to handle a seller, all the different scenarios and situations. And once you hear it done, you'll realize that the sellers are just normal people too, and it's not this big scary thing that we get in our head about. But
yeah, we had some dynamite calls. Let me tell you, I mean, people who were selling and we were explaining to them how it worked. I've got one guy I talked to and I'm like, hey, I might have a deal for you. Actually, it was pretty awesome.
Very cool.
So, oh my gosh. Okay. I'm sharing my cell phone number down below.
There it is.
So if you've got a question about how this works,
or you need that link,
just shoot me a text. This is my actual cell phone number. Somebody just called me a minute ago. So it does work. 585-207-2240. I just got a call from Jason. Jason, if you're listening live, I will be calling you back shortly because I know you want to get that link for Saturday and had a question on the deal. So, guys, let's get some deals. Let's help out some people. And that's what it's about. And if you could even make money helping people, it doesn't get any better than that. So stay tuned. We got a lot more coming.
Yeah. All right. Last question of the day is from Sean. If the seller agrees to sell on payments, but they have a realtor, how does that realtor get paid? You just figure that out. It's part of the cost of entry. Ideally, you're going to help that realtor. If they've been there all along, you're going to want to help that person too. They've got mouths to feed at home. And you just got to remember the deal has to make sense. You have to explain that just normal, everyday conversation.
And agents can be flexible on their commission too.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Agent can be flexible. We did one deal in Tampa. $500,000 home, and the seller was in a really bad jam. Agent was smart. She actually gave us the offer. She's like, listen, Joe, give me $5,000 for the commission. Give the seller a few $1,000s so they don't even lose their house because they were about to, and the deal will work. So she was super flexible. So having the conversation with the agent, but I have the conversation to even see if the deal makes sense first. And if it does, and we're all agreeing, then I'm going to have that second conversation with the agent to see if there's something that we could work out. I want them to get paid. Maybe it's not full commission, but maybe they could be a little flexible, and to where now we could all make a little money together.
Yeah, we all want to win. So if you want more on that webinar, just drop comments below. We'll make sure you get that invite. It is this Saturday live, and it'll be on the weekend, which is so grab your coffee, get your breakfast, and let's talk about buying properties with $100 down and no money or no credit checks and no having to go to the banks. And if you love what you're listening to, if you have a second, could you go over and give us a review on Spotify or Apple? Make sure you're subscribing to YouTube channel, Creative Finance Playbook, Jen and Joe. We will be here again next week live, coming with lots of fun stuff. We've got almost a month and a half left of 2024. We're going to rock into the new year and go do some deals, guys.
Yay. Awesome.
Thanks for being here.